Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode. I'm so excited you are here. If you are new to this series, I'm doing a series of problems that a lot of my clients come to me with. I figured I would bring into the podcast. So if you want to check out the rest of the series, you can go to the YouTube channel and go to the playlist Help, followed by whatever the problem is. And today we're going to deal with one that I hear a lot. It's help. My family won't support me. That could be your spouse, your partner, your parents, just regular family or friends. It can mean anyone in your life. Honestly, you can even take the same advice past anybody, whether it's friends, groups, coworkers, people you've talked to who just don't understand why you want to do the thing you do or don't support you. I want to help you think about this in a completely different way, okay? So here is the thing. I think that what happens oftentimes is that you have a dream or you have a vision or you want to try something. And for a lot of us, there's already uncertainty and doubt, right? When we don't know how it's going to turn out. When you want to start a business or you want to change that career, you want to jump to a new job, there is a possibility that you try it and it doesn't work or you don't like it or you realize you actually liked the thing that you did before. You just didn't have that clarity. And for most of us, we know that. There's no guarantee, right? There's no making a decision knowing like, hey, this is going to be the thing that I'm the most passionate about. And so we already have a little bit of insecurity around this thing we want to do. This is important. I'm going to get back to why that insecurity is important, but it's just important to know I already feel doubt. And then I go and tell people about it. I go talk about this business I want to start or how I want to, change careers and go into this completely different field. And then they start voicing their doubt. Right? They start making judgments. They start saying things like, well, are you sure? I don't know. You didn't stick to that last business, or you don't really know how to do that. How would you start that? Or what if it doesn't work? Or what if you try this and it fails? Or right now in the economy is not a really good time, or, you're going to lose everything, or everyone's going to judge you. You get the point. There's a lot of thoughts that other people like to put on you. And then for a lot of us, we get really defensive, right? We think like I have to defend this idea, or we retreat into ourselves. We sort of decide like they're right. Maybe it's stupid or I don't want to talk about it anymore. And so we give up on that idea. And I don't want either of those options to happen. So I want to talk to you about it in a way that you can maybe think about it differently. The first thing I want you to understand is that it comes from a place of love. I know it doesn't seem like that in the moment, but oftentimes you are dealing with people who have their own limiting beliefs. They have also been raised in a society like you that taught them that there's one right way and that you have to do the secure thing and that you don't leave your job and you don't start something new. And so when someone wants to go against the status quo, when someone comes to them and says like, hey, I want to leave my job and start this side hustle, it instantly threatens their way of what they think is the quote unquote right way of doing work or life or adulting. And so you're going to get pushback because it goes against what they have been programmed to believe is the correct way. And usually when I say it comes from love is they want to protect you. They want you to be okay, right? They are trying to think about like, well, if you do fail or if it doesn't work or you lose money or you're going to get judged, then that's going to feel terrible for you. It's going to cause maybe some other problems. And so they want to help you not deal with that. And so they're putting their fear that has been given to them by society onto you because they don't want you to feel that. Especially, usually if it's like your spouse or whatnot, or maybe parents, hopefully it's not that they hate you. If it is, then we have bigger problems and you should go to therapy for that and figure out what to do. But usually it comes from a place of like, I don't know about this. I don't want you to lose a bunch of money. I don't want you to like leave your job and regret it. I don't want you to have to deal with whatever the pitfalls can come from this decision. And I say that just to say, because I think a lot of times we get really defensive of like, why can't they just support my dreams? And I want you to just know when you look at it from this perspective of like, they're coming from a good place. Maybe their delivery sucks. Maybe they don't tell you the right way. Maybe it's not really what you had asked for, but they're doing it because they don't want you to fail. And we can understand that. I think we can come to a place of like, I understand that they want what's best for me and they think this is the way to get what's best for me. We're on the same team here. They're not against me. They simply do not understand why I want to do this thing. Okay. Which leads me to the second point. It's not their vision. It's not their job to understand it. They weren't given this desire. They don't know what you want to do. They are not in your head, right? That vision or that goal or that dream is yours. The excitement behind it is yours. It is not theirs. And so they are not going to see it the way that you see it. And so oftentimes we want them to like think of it the way that we think of it. We want them to get as excited as we get about it, but they don't have the same vision. That's your vision. And that's great. They don't have to understand it. They don't have to get what you're doing. That's why they're not doing it. Right? And I'm going to get to why you want them to do it next. But I think that it's really important for you to understand that everybody doesn't have to see or be as excited about the thing that you want to be excited about. You have to. That's your vision. You have to be the one that keeps up the motivation, that sees where you're going with it. I'm going to give you an example of how this played out in my life, but I want you to just really understand that. Like, what if it's okay if they don't understand it? What if I don't need everybody to be fully on board and fully understand in order for me to do the thing I want to do? And that takes me to number 3 is I want you to ask yourself, why do you want them to, quote unquote, support you or understand? Obviously, I understand like implicitly that it's easier. It would be nice for everybody. But I want you to really think about it. Why do I need them to be fully on board? Why do I need their support? Now, again, another caveat. If they are financially supporting you, so let's say you live with your parents and your parents, you have to have a certain job or they're going to cut you off, or let's say you're talking to your spouse and your spouse doesn't want you to leave your job, then there are different conversations to be had and we can get into that. But for the purposes of this, I'm talking about a lot of people where they aren't actually financially dependent on anybody. And it's their choice to do the thing they want to do, but they're still stuck because they want everybody else to understand what they're doing and support it and be fully on board. And I want you to really question, why do I need that? And I'm going to tell you the answer. Luckily, you came to the right place. We want that permission from them because it silences that insecurity within us. So when I talked about when you are picking something new, you already have some insecurity around it. It's uncertain. There's doubt. We don't know how it's going to work out, right? I already have those fears of what if it doesn't work? What if I regret it? What if I waste money? What if I waste time? What if I try this and I don't like it? What is everyone going to think of me? We already have all of those thoughts. And when someone else voices it, it triggers our own insecurity. It makes that voice louder. We can't ignore it as much. We can't hype ourselves up. We can't use motivation to kind of push past it. We have to confront it, and that's scary. And so we don't want to hear it. We want, when someone says, if I tell you my business idea and you say, oh my God, that's a great idea, you should totally do it, that soothes something within me, that soothes my own fear and doubt. Like, okay, if this person also thinks that it's a good idea, then maybe I'm on to something. Then maybe all of my thoughts about it that are good about it are right. And I can continue doing this, right? But when someone says oh, I don't know if anybody would buy that. Are you sure? I don't think that's that great of an idea. Or you've never run a business before. You don't know what you're doing. That triggers your own thought. You already know, I've never been an entrepreneur before. I'm not sure I know how to do this. I might fail at this. And a lot of us don't want to deal with our own insecurity. We don't want to deal with our own thoughts about it. That insecurity is really loud and we work really hard to kind of push past it. And so we worry that when they bring it up, it's going to trigger something in me. And so I don't want to hear it. I want them to just tell me how wonderful this idea is. And I want them to tell me that they'll support me no matter what. And I don't want to think about how maybe they'll judge me later, And so the work that you have to do is work on your own thoughts about it, not theirs. You don't have to convince anyone. You don't need them to support you. Would it be nice? Sure. Does it make it easier? Yeah, of course. But if they don't, okay, they don't. They don't get it. It's not their vision. But I have to work on my own thoughts. If I have a lot of insecurity around it, if I have a lot of deep-seated fears, if I think it won't work, then when someone else says it, it threatens to kind of throw me off balance. But if I work on my own thoughts about how could this be the best thing for me, even if it doesn't work, right? I want you to think about that. If your thoughts were you know what, I want to do this because I'm going to learn a ton and I'm going to grow and I'm going to learn how to take up space and I want to really deal with my fear of being seen and I want to try something new and I want to experiment and I want to have this really big life. Then when someone says like, oh my God, you might fail, I'm like, yeah, maybe I will. It doesn't trigger as much of an insecurity in me because that's not the reason I'm even doing this. Like, yeah, I might be successful, I might not, but there's a whole host of other reasons that make this a worthwhile endeavor, that I want to try this out because I am going to go on this adventure and I'm going to learn a lot and it's going to be amazing regardless of what happens. When I have that belief, when I work on those thoughts of my own belief as to why I'm doing it, when someone else brings up a random insecurity that they have about it and they say like, you might lose some money, I'm going to be like, yeah, I might. All these other reasons are still reasons why I want to do this. When I work on my own thoughts about why it's the best reason, why I've sold myself on like, this is the best reason, other people's doubts don't creep in as much. And so I say that to say like, your work is not in convincing everybody else why it's the best thing. Your work is in convincing yourself why you should do it. The more you work on that, the easier it becomes to not let other people's doubts throw you off or other people's judgments. This is the work that you're going to have to do regardless of when you put it out because not everyone's going to understand what you're doing. And so spend that time instead of trying to overly explain yourself to everybody and get everyone else on board, get yourself on board. Really think about why you want to do this and why it means what it means to you and what it might set you up for and what the future could hold and what you're going to learn from it and how it could be the best thing for you. Get those thoughts in order. And that leads me to the last thing that I really think you need to consider is, what am I asking for from my family? Am I asking for support or am I asking for permission? I think oftentimes we don't realize that we're asking for permission, but that's what we're doing. We think if we go around and we ask everybody what they think, what they're going through, like if they think it's the best idea or not, that I'm simply like looking for their support in this because I don't know, it would feel good. But oftentimes what we're asking for is like I said, because I have these insecurities, I want them to say like, yes, you may go ahead. This is a good enough idea for you to move, past that, for you to implement. And you don't need that. Again, unless they financially are, involved in this, that's a different calculation. But for a lot of us, it's simply, I'm going to run to every single person I know. I'm going to go to my parents and my best friend and my spouse, and I'm going to I'm going to talk about this thing. And I want them all to give me permission that it's okay. I say this because I know there's a lot of the people that come to my coaching calls, that come to my, in my membership, oftentimes they're trying to like explain to me what they want to do because they want me to say like, yeah, you should go ahead. And I always ask them like, are you asking for my permission if you can do this? Of course you can. You're an adult. You don't need my permission, but you want me to sort of give you the stamp of approval. Now, that's not to say, I get that, like, you want to see if there's holes in your ideas. You want to see if like, hey, am I missing something? And that's okay to do, but be really clear that's what you're doing, right? When you're going into these conversations, be very clear, what is it that I'm asking of them? Am I asking for their support? Am I asking for their permission? Am I asking for them to like see my blind spots? That's a wonderful way to go about a conversation, but know that that's what you're asking so that when they do give you blind spots, when they do poke holes, you're not defensive about it. You're like, yeah, you're right. I hadn't thought about that. This is how I would deal with that. Or I need to spend some time coming up with how I would deal with that pitfall. That could be a really wonderful collaborative experience. But I think for a lot of us, we don't even know what we are seeking from our family and friends. We just go in there and we kind of like, dump everything that we have within us, where it's like, oh, I want to do this business and I wanted to do this. And we want them to just be like, yeah, that sounds great, even though that's not what they think. And so I want you to be really intentional about what you're seeking. Do I feel like I need their permission for them to tell me it's okay to go forward with this? And if I don't, then can I emphasize that in the beginning? For a lot of us, like when I said, like we already have our insecurities. And so when I'm not seeking permission, I want to do this thing, I can phrase that conversation much differently than me just saying like, hey, mom and dad, or hey, husband or so-and-so, I'm going to leave my job to start a flower shop and just let them say whatever they want. I can go in there and say like, listen, I'm going to tell you about a dream I have. And it might not make sense to you. I get that you might be concerned for me, or you might think that this came out of left field, but I've been thinking about it for a long time. And so I'm going to tell you, and I just need your support. You don't need to understand it. I can understand, I'll ask you for your opinion on what you think I should work on. But for right now, I just need you to support me. You will get a much different reaction from your family and friends than you will if you just go in and say like, hey, I was thinking about starting this business. Because they think like, well, I'm just going to give you all of my opinions about this business. And of course, a lot of my opinions are going to be things that I'm concerned about. And then you get upset and it leads, So like be very clear on like, what am I asking from them? And can I make that intentionally known? Especially if you're dealing with someone where like maybe they're naturally more negative, or maybe they're constantly like judgmental or cutting things down. Like understand that before you're talking to the person. They're not going to be your number one cheerleader. And I think like as an aside to this too, is that like be very intentional who you talk to about it. You don't have to talk to everyone about it. You don't need everyone's permission. Everyone doesn't need to know. Everyone doesn't need to have an opinion until you get to a place where you're able to handle those opinions, right? When you're able to deal with some of the judgment. Kind of guard it a little bit with your heart. Like know who you can talk to or who you need to talk to and who you don't. You don't have to go to every single person. I'm going to give you an example of what this looked like in my life and how it shifted a lot of things for me. So when I talk about like after I'd quit the law, I wanted to get into entrepreneurship. I started a photo booth company, and that photo booth company required manufacturing. And so I would manufacture photo booths and then I would sell them, and I would also do rentals. And then, so it required it was a physical product, and it was in a, very localized location at the time. And I'd also really been looking into like whether I was going to scale it, whether I was going to try to get some investment and make it like a franchise type business. So that was the type of business it was. At the time, I had thought about this podcast, the idea for this podcast. I had mulled over the idea for this podcast for 2 years. I really wanted to do this podcast, and I couldn't understand why I was so drawn to it. At the time, I wasn't really aware of like a lot of my own feelings around it, but it kept gnawing at me. And I kept checking at the time. I would check Apple Podcasts to see if someone else had started something similar, as if I couldn't start it if someone else had. But anyways, I would obsessively check all the time. And I remember when I would find things that were sort of similar, I would feel this like dread in my stomach, like, oh, somebody else started this. And hey, that's a good indication that that's something that you want to start. But I sat on this for a couple of years because I was building this other business. I had 2 young kids at home. And so this idea for the podcast, I didn't really know what it was going to turn into. By the time I decided, I'd gotten to a point where the beginning of 2018, where I was like, I am going to explode if I don't start this podcast. Like, I have thought about this so much. It is driving me insane. I have to do this podcast. Something is pulling me towards it. And I really want, and at the time I listened to a lot of podcasts, and I did have some secret dreams about turning it into a business. I hadn't really been able to vocalize that part yet. And I remember I was having these conversations with my husband about it throughout the years. Like, as I had been thinking about it, I kept thinking about doing this podcast. He wasn't a big podcast listener. He's not on social media. He didn't really understand why I wanted to do this. And at the time, what he was seeing was I was already kind of stretched thin trying to build this business while raising 2 young kids. And I didn't have a ton of extra time. And so, of course, now when I look back, it's of course, at the time I was annoyed because he would constantly come up with like, yeah, I don't think it's the right time for you to do that. Like, focus on your business, like scale that business, spend the time that you have or the energy you have on that. I remember him telling me like, why don't you start a podcast about that business? And I was like, because I don't want to talk about photo booths. Why would I start a podcast about that, And I remember getting frustrated because he just wasn't seeing the vision of what I wanted to do. And he kept saying like, yeah, I think it's a good idea, but like, why are you taking on something else? You shouldn't be doing this right now. And I remember when I got to the point where I was like, sort of realized, and I had let him influence me in not doing it. I was like, he's right. I don't have time. I kept pushing it back for months and months. And it got to the point where I was like, I don't care. I want to do this podcast. I have to do it. I have to get it out there. Maybe it'll turn into a business. I don't know what it is. I just want to jump on this idea. And I remember a conversation we had where I went to him and I said, listen, I totally understand that you're not going to get this, that you think that the podcast is a waste of time for me right now and that I don't have a lot of extra time. And so I should use that time for the business. I get what you're saying. You're not wrong. But I have to start this podcast and I can't explain it to you, but there's something within me that will not quiet down. And like, I have to listen to this or I'm going to lose my mind. And I want to do this. So what I need is for you to support me. I need you to not try to talk me out of it. I need you to not tell me that it's a bad idea. Even if it fails, I have to just put it out there. And he was like, okay. All right. I didn't know it was that serious. I won't say anything. Like, if you want to do this, I will support you as long as you want to do it, and we'll see where it goes. And it was such an interesting conversation. It was such an interesting boundary that I'd never created before. And I started realizing like, oh, I had been waiting all of this time for him to tell me, you know what, it's a good idea. You should go forward and you should have this podcast. But I kept thinking like, he just doesn't understand what I want to create. I didn't really even understand fully what I wanted to create. And so when I took that burden off of him and I was like, he doesn't have to get it. He still fully doesn't understand what I do. He's still not on social media. He doesn't have an Instagram. He's never had it. Doesn't have Facebook or TikTok or anything. The man, like I realize now looking back, like the photo booth business made sense to him because he's an engineer and his business is a product-based business. So he could understand that. So he was like, yeah, you've already built this. You have all the stuff in place. Let's like scale this. On paper, that made sense. In my heart, it did not. I did not like that business. I didn't feel passionate about it. I wasn't excited to grow it. I didn't want to work on it as much. I felt really passionate about this idea and I really wanted to see where it went. Now, 5 years later, I have built a business that kind of took off, did much better than the photo booth business had ever done, was really something I was passionate about that that fundamentally changed a lot of my life. Obviously, looking back, he can see that it was a good idea or he can acknowledge or he has praised me a lot for it. But he wasn't the one that had the vision. And so he didn't need to be the one that gave me permission. And when I realized that's what I'm waiting for, I keep talking to him about this because I'm hoping at some point he says, you know what, you should do the podcast. And I was like, that's not going to happen. So I have a choice to make. I either decide I'm still going to do it, whether he understands or not, or I'm going to let it go. And I wasn't ready to let it go. So I was like, all right, I got to just have this conversation with him. It's also like, I don't have to yell at him. I don't have to get defensive. I don't have to tell him like, you never support my dreams. You don't understand me. I just have to get like, he's not going to get it. And that's okay. And I didn't share it with a lot of other people. I only shared it with him because I was like, I am not going to let other people talk me out of this because I'm already terrified of doing this. I don't want to put myself out there. I don't want people to judge me. This was like a very scary thing for me to do, but I was like, I'm called to do it. And so I'm going to do it. And then as I got closer, when I told people, it was already a done deal. It was interesting that people weren't going to say something when I'm like, oh, I'm launching a podcast. I already picked the name. I already have it recorded. I'm going to start it. It's like, there was nothing else to ask for them for. Like my family was like, all right, let us know what we can do. And so I say this from that experience that I think for a lot of us, we're waiting for people to kind of give us that stamp of approval, for people to tell us that it's okay. And then we're allowed to start and go after our dreams. But you don't need that permission. You don't need them to understand. You don't need them to give you that stamp of approval. You get to decide. And then you get to know like how, what is the relationship I want to have with them in this project? How much do I want to talk to them about it? How much support do I need from them? And I think that when, like, again, it comes from, if we just talk about the other caveat that I made about like if they are financially involved, then it's a different calculation. Again, even within that, I think that you can ask yourself a question of like how, instead of it being like, how do I get them to support me? It's how can I make this work? So what I mean by that is like when I was doing the podcast, it's not that I wanted to completely disregard what my husband was saying. I understood that like what I did with the business did impact, our income and what I was making. And so I can understand that he had a lot of, he also had something riding on it and he wanted me to grow that business. I get that. And I think for some of you, if like, let's say you want to start a side hustle, and your spouse has a problem with it because they don't want you to leave your job or whatnot, you can still have that conversation of like, when I talked to him about it, it was a much longer conversation. Part of it was I sort of showed him how I was going to do it. I was like, listen, I'm only going to dedicate 2 hours to it a week. I'm going to record in this and I'm going to edit and I'm going to have this person help me. And that's all I'm going to do. And I'm going to still keep doing this business. And so when I had sort of explained to him how I knew I was going to take care of it, there was less for him to be concerned about. Now, if, for instance, like you want to quit a job, then that is a conversation that you need to have with your spouse about, like, you know, how you are going to set yourself up for that. Like whether that's savings, whether you guys have a runway, whether you're going to like replace your income before you leave, so that the person understands that this isn't something that's like willy-nilly, that you're like, oh, I think I'm just going to quit my job and become a photographer. You're kind of showing them like, I have thought this through. This is what my plan is, and I need your support in it. It becomes a lot easier for them to give you that support rather than when it might seem like you don't really have a plan. You haven't really thought any of it through. So I think like the final maybe point in taking this home, I think a lot of times when people come to me and they say like, help me, like my family won't support me, I think they want me to give them a strategy to get their family to support them. But you don't control what other people think and feel. Unfortunately, if you did, you'd make a lot of money. You could change the world, but we don't. And so the solution to this isn't like, how do I get my family to support me? It's how can I decide what I want to do, whether they support me or not? How can I make myself okay even if they don't support me? How can I decide what my next step is, regardless of what they think about this vision? How do I focus on my vision and my thoughts about it and my insecurities and not on what they are thinking about it or saying about it? The more you do that, the more you focus on yourself, the more you come up with your plan, the more you ask people for what you need, the more you structure it in that way, the more you don't need their validation or their stamp of approval, the easier it becomes to go after those dreams that you have, even if other people don't get it. So that's your work, my friends. Go out there and support yourself. I hope this was helpful. I will be back next week with another episode.